Over 60 and your legs just don't feel like they used to? You're not imagining it. But here's something most people don't realize. A lot of what gets written off as just aging, the heaviness in your legs, the cramps that show up at night, the stiffness when you stand up after sitting for a while, may actually be connected to something much more fixable than people think. Three nutrients in particular play a surprisingly direct role in how your legs feel, how well your muscles recover overnight, and how steady you are on your feet. And the way most people take them, if they take them at all, may not be giving their body the best shot at using them. Today we're going to look at three vitamins that research has connected to nerve function, muscle repair, and bone-muscle communication in older adults, what they do, why timing may matter, and a few important things to know before you add anything new to your routine, especially if you're on medication. One important note before we start: we're not doctors, and nothing in this video is medical advice. Some of what we're about to cover, especially around one of these three vitamins, comes with a real interaction risk if you're on certain medications, and we'll flag that clearly when we get there. If you take prescription medication of any kind, please talk to your doctor or pharmacist before adding new supplements, even ones that seem harmless. Maybe this sounds familiar. You wake up in the middle of the night because of a cramp that seems to come out of nowhere, grab your calf and wait it out until it passes. Or you stand up after sitting for a while and there's a moment, just a second or two, where your legs need to catch up with the rest of you before you feel steady. Or maybe it's something quieter, a kind of heaviness by the end of the day that wasn't there a few years ago, even though you haven't done anything different. For a long time, the explanation for all of this tends to be the same one word: aging. And to be fair, aging is part of the picture. Bodies do change over time, and that's normal and expected. But aging as an explanation can sometimes become a bit of a catch-all, one that stops the conversation before it really starts. The truth is often more specific than that, and more useful, because specific things can often be checked and sometimes addressed. With that said, let's start with the first one, a vitamin most seniors have heard of, but very few realize how directly it's connected to leg strength and balance. Vitamin B12. Most people think of B12 as an energy vitamin, something connected to feeling tired or run down. But B12 also plays a critical role in nerve health, specifically in maintaining the protective coating around your nerves called the myelin sheath. Think of your nerves like electrical wires, and myelin as the insulation around them. When that insulation breaks down, signals between your brain and your muscles don't travel as cleanly. For your legs, this matters a lot. Many of the longest nerves in your body run from your spine down to your feet. When B12 levels are low, those nerves are often affected first and most noticeably, which is why B12 deficiency in older adults is often associated with numbness or tingling in the feet, a sense of unsteadiness, and in some cases an increased risk of falls. Here's the part that's especially relevant for people over 60. B12 deficiency becomes more common with age, and it's often not about how much B12 you're eating. As we get older, our stomachs tend to produce less of the stomach acid needed to release B12 from the protein in food. So even someone eating plenty of meat, eggs, or dairy can still end up running low, simply because their body isn't extracting it as efficiently as it used to. Certain medications can make this more likely too, particularly long-term use of acid-reducing medications and metformin, which is commonly prescribed for type 2 diabetes. If either of those applies to you, it may be worth asking your doctor about checking your B12 levels specifically. Research has connected low B12 levels in older adults with reduced muscle strength, slower nerve conduction, and a higher risk of difficulty walking and balance problems. Some studies have specifically looked at B12 status alongside fall risk in elderly populations, particularly those with diabetes, given how common B12 depletion is in that group. Now about timing. Some people find that taking B12 in the evening works well for them, and there's a reasonable rationale for this. Much of your body's tissue repair, including nerve repair, happens during sleep, so having key nutrients available during that window isn't a bad idea. That said, B12 doesn't have strong stimulant effects, so for most people it doesn't matter hugely whether it's taken morning or evening. The more important factor is consistency and choosing a form your body can actually absorb. On that note, if your stomach acid production has declined, a regular B12 pill that needs to be broken down and absorbed through the digestive tract may not be your best option. Sublingual B12, a tablet that dissolves under your tongue, bypasses much of that digestive process and goes more directly into your bloodstream. Methylcobalamin is generally considered a well-absorbed, ready-to-use form of B12, and many people find sublingual methylcobalamin a practical choice. If your legs have been feeling numb, tingly, weak, or unsteady, especially if it's been creeping up gradually, B12 status is genuinely worth discussing with your doctor. It's a simple blood test, and if you are deficient, addressing it tends to help, though how much and how quickly varies a lot from person to person. It's worth understanding how a B12 deficiency tends to develop because it's rarely sudden. Most people don't wake up one day with a deficiency. It builds slowly, often over years, as the body's stores gradually deplete. In the early stages, the signs can be subtle enough that they're easy to dismiss. A bit more fatigue than usual, occasional pins and needles in the feet after sitting for a while, or feeling slightly less steady than you remember being. Because these symptoms overlap so much with what people simply expect aging to feel like, a B12 deficiency often goes unrecognized for a long time. As it progresses, the symptoms tend to become more consistent: numbness that doesn't go away, a noticeable change in how you walk, or a sense that your feet aren't quite registering the ground the way they used to. In more advanced cases, B12 deficiency can affect memory and cognition as well, since B12 plays a role in nervous system function more broadly, not just in the peripheral nerves that run to your legs and feet. The reassuring part is that for many people, especially those caught at an earlier stage, addressing a B12 deficiency can lead to real improvement. Nerve tissue does have some capacity to repair itself once it's getting what it needs again, though the timeline for that varies. Some people notice changes within weeks, while for others, especially if the deficiency had been present for a long time, improvement is slower and sometimes only partial. This is part of why catching it earlier tends to make a meaningful difference. In terms of food sources, B12 is naturally found in animal products. Meat, fish, eggs, and dairy are the main dietary sources. This is one of the reasons vegetarians and especially vegans need to be particularly mindful of B12, often relying on fortified foods or supplements, since plant foods don't naturally contain meaningful amounts of B12. But as we mentioned, even people eating plenty of B12 containing foods can become deficient as they age, simply because of how absorption changes, which is why dietary intake alone doesn't tell the whole story, and why a blood test is so much more informative than trying to guess based on what's on your plate. Now let's move to the second vitamin, one that's much more famous for bones, but that also plays a surprisingly direct role in muscle function. This is vitamin D3. Most people know vitamin D as the sunshine vitamin, and mostly think of it in terms of bone health and calcium. But vitamin D also plays a role in muscle tissue itself. There are vitamin D receptors directly in muscle cells, and adequate vitamin D levels have been associated with better muscle strength and function in older adults, particularly in the legs. Vitamin D deficiency is extremely common in older populations. Multiple studies have found that a large proportion of seniors have insufficient levels, especially in regions with less year-round sunlight, or among people who spend most of their time indoors. And here's something worth knowing. As skin ages, it becomes less efficient at producing vitamin D from sun exposure. So even someone who gets outside regularly may be producing meaningfully less vitamin D from that sun exposure than they did decades earlier. Low vitamin D has been linked in research to muscle weakness, particularly affecting the larger muscles in the legs and hips, and to increased fall risk in older adults. Some studies have found that vitamin D supplementation in deficient individuals is associated with improvements in muscle strength and a reduction in falls, though the research is more mixed when it comes to people who already have adequate vitamin D levels, where additional supplementation doesn't seem to add much benefit. This is actually a really important point. Vitamin D is one of those nutrients where more isn't necessarily better if you're not deficient to begin with. The benefits researchers have observed are largely in people correcting an actual deficiency. So if you're considering vitamin D supplementation, getting your levels checked first, most doctors can do this with a simple blood test, gives you a much clearer picture of whether and how much supplementation might help you specifically. In terms of form, D3 or cholecalciferol is generally considered the form that's more effective at raising blood levels of vitamin D compared to D2. And because vitamin D is fat soluble, taking it alongside a meal or snack that contains some fat, even something small like a few nuts or a spoonful of yogurt, can help with absorption. As for timing, evening versus morning doesn't appear to make a major difference for most people based on current research, though some people do report that taking vitamin D very close to bedtime affects their sleep, so if you notice that, simply shift it to earlier in the day. Now, the third vitamin on this list is one that doesn't get talked about nearly as much, and it comes with something important you need to know before considering it, especially if you're on certain medications. This is vitamin K2. Vitamin K2 is part of the vitamin K family, but it's different from vitamin K1, which is the form found in leafy green vegetables and is mainly associated with blood clotting. K2 is found in smaller amounts in foods like fermented soy products, certain cheeses, and egg yolks, and it plays a role that's sometimes described as directing calcium to where it's needed, primarily into bone tissue, rather than allowing it to accumulate in places like blood vessels and soft tissue. Some research has explored K2's role in bone density and cardiovascular health, and there's also some evidence connecting vitamin K status more broadly to musculoskeletal health in older adults, including measures of muscle strength and function. The research here is genuinely interesting, but it's also less extensive than the research on B12 and D3, and much of it comes from smaller studies. Here is the critical thing you need to know, and this is the most important part of this entire video. If you take a blood thinner, especially warfarin, also sold as Coumadin, vitamin K2 can interfere with how that medication works. This isn't a minor timing issue or something you can simply work around by spacing doses apart. Vitamin K, including K2, directly affects the same clotting pathway that warfarin works on. Research has shown that even small amounts of vitamin K2, amounts far lower than what's in a typical supplement, can measurably affect warfarin's effectiveness and the blood tests, called INR, that doctors use to monitor it. If you are on warfarin or a similar medication, please do not start taking vitamin K2 supplements without talking to your doctor first. This is exactly the kind of thing your doctor needs to know about, because it may require adjusting your medication monitoring, or they may simply advise against it for you specifically. This isn't us being overly cautious. This is a well-documented interaction, and it's one of the most common reasons doctors ask patients about supplement use in the first place. If you're not on a blood thinner, vitamin K2 is generally considered to have a good safety profile for most people in typical dietary amounts, and some people choose to get more of it through foods like aged cheeses or natto rather than supplements. But again, if you take any prescription medication, it's always worth a quick conversation with your doctor or pharmacist before adding anything new, because K2 and warfarin is far from the only supplement medication interaction out there. Before we bring everything together, there's a fourth nutrient that comes up constantly in conversations about leg cramps and muscle function in older adults, and it deserves an honest look, partly because the research on it is more mixed than a lot of online content suggests. This is magnesium. Magnesium plays a role in how muscles contract and relax, and in how nerves transmit signals, broadly similar territory to what we discussed with B12, though through different mechanisms. Magnesium deficiency has been linked to muscle cramps, and surveys suggest that a meaningful portion of older adults experience nighttime leg cramps on a fairly regular basis. By some estimates, around half of people over 65 report having them at least occasionally. Given that, it would make sense if magnesium supplementation were a slam dunk solution for nighttime leg cramps. And this is exactly the kind of claim you'll see all over the internet. Magnesium presented as the simple fix for cramping legs. But here's where we want to be honest with you. The actual research is considerably more mixed than that framing suggests. A Cochrane review, which is generally considered one of the most rigorous types of medical research summaries, looked specifically at magnesium for muscle cramps, including studies in older adults. The overall conclusion was that the evidence for magnesium supplementation helping with leg cramps in older adults specifically was weak, and a separate large study published in a major medical journal found that magnesium supplementation didn't significantly reduce nighttime leg cramps compared to placebo in older adults. So why do so many people still report that magnesium helped their cramps? There are a few possible explanations. One is that if someone was genuinely magnesium deficient to begin with, which does happen, particularly in people with certain digestive conditions, those on certain medications like diuretics or proton pump inhibitors, or those with poorly controlled diabetes, then correcting that deficiency could plausibly help. But for someone who isn't deficient, the research doesn't show a strong additional benefit from supplementing further. Another possibility is simply the placebo effect, which is a real and well-documented phenomenon, especially for symptoms like cramps that naturally fluctuate night to night regardless of what you do. None of this means magnesium is unimportant. It's an essential mineral involved in hundreds of processes in the body, and getting adequate magnesium through diet is absolutely worthwhile. Foods like leafy greens, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and legumes are all good sources. But if you're specifically hoping that a magnesium supplement will be the fix for nighttime leg cramps, it's worth knowing going in that the evidence for that specific use in people your age is genuinely weak, and managing expectations accordingly may save you some disappointment and some money. If leg cramps are a significant ongoing issue for you, that's also worth mentioning to your doctor because cramps can sometimes be related to other things. Certain medications, circulation issues, or electrolyte imbalances that go beyond just magnesium, and your doctor is in a much better position to figure out what's actually going on than any of us watching from home. Before we move into how to actually put all of this into practice, let's go through a few questions that tend to come up around this topic. A common one is, can I just take a multivitamin and cover all of this? The honest answer is, it depends. Many multivitamins do contain B12 and D3, often in modest amounts. But the amounts in a standard multivitamin may not be enough to correct an actual deficiency. They're generally designed to cover baseline needs for someone without a deficiency, not to treat one. And multivitamins vary enormously in what forms of each nutrient they use and how well those forms are absorbed. So a multivitamin isn't necessarily a bad idea as a general baseline, but it's not a substitute for figuring out whether you actually have a deficiency in the first place and addressing that specifically if you do. Another question that comes up a lot: if I feel fine, say, do I still need to worry about any of this? Not necessarily, and this is actually an important point. We're not suggesting everyone over 60 needs to start taking 3 or 4 new supplements regardless of how they feel. The information in this video is most relevant if you're noticing specific symptoms: numbness, tingling, unusual fatigue, balance changes, frequent cramps, or if you have risk factors like long-term use of certain medications, digestive conditions that affect absorption, or limited sun exposure. If none of that applies to you, this is more good to know for the future than urgent action needed today. People also ask, is it dangerous to take too much of these vitamins? This varies by nutrient. B12 is water-soluble, meaning your body excretes what it doesn't need, and it's generally considered to have a wide safety margin. Toxicity from B12 is quite rare. Vitamin D, on the other hand, is fat-soluble and can accumulate in the body, so very high doses over long periods can potentially cause problems, which is part of why getting your levels checked rather than just taking high doses indefinitely is a good idea. And we've already covered the specific concern with K2 and blood thinners. The general principle holds across all of these: more is not automatically better, and natural doesn't mean risk-free, especially once you're combining supplements with prescription medications. And finally, a question we think is one of the most important: why didn't my doctor mention any of this? This isn't necessarily a sign that something was missed. And many doctors do ask about diet and may check B12 or vitamin D levels as part of routine blood work, particularly if you mention relevant symptoms. But appointments are often short, and unless you specifically bring up something like leg numbness, balance changes, or cramping, it might not come up. This is actually one of the most useful things you can do for yourself. If you've been writing off certain symptoms as just getting older, mentioning them specifically at your next appointment, and asking whether checking your B12 or vitamin D levels makes sense can open up a conversation that might not have happened otherwise. So, to bring this together, B12 supports the nerves that carry signals to your legs, particularly relevant if you've noticed numbness, tingling, or balance changes. Vitamin D plays a role in muscle function and strength, particularly if you're actually deficient, which is worth checking with a simple blood test. And vitamin K2 has some interesting research behind it for bone and muscle health, but it comes with a real and well-documented interaction risk for anyone on blood-thinning medication. If there's one single takeaway from this video, it's this. Rather than guessing and adding supplements based on a video, including this one, the most useful first step is usually a simple blood test from your doctor. B12 and vitamin D levels are both easy and inexpensive to check, and knowing your actual levels tells you far more than assuming you're deficient based on symptoms alone. And if you're on any medication, especially blood thinners, that conversation with your doctor isn't optional. It's the single most important step before changing anything about your supplement routine. Beyond the vitamins themselves, there are a few simple daily habits that tend to support the same things we've been talking about: nerve function, muscle recovery, and circulation in the legs. None of these are dramatic, and none of them require special equipment or a big lifestyle overhaul, but they tend to work quietly in the background to support everything else. Let's start with hydration because it's one of the most overlooked factors in how legs feel, especially later in the day. When you're even mildly dehydrated, your blood becomes slightly thicker and circulation becomes a little less efficient. And circulation is how nutrients, including the vitamins we've discussed, actually reach your muscle and nerve tissue in the first place. You can take all the right supplements, but if circulation to your legs isn't great, those nutrients have a harder time getting where they need to go. The good news is that fixing this doesn't require drinking large amounts of water all at once. In fact, that's not particularly helpful and can be uncomfortable. Spacing fluid intake throughout the day rather than trying to catch up all at once in the evening tends to work better. If plain water feels unappealing, herbal tea, water with a slice of lemon or cucumber, or even water-rich foods like soups and fruits all count toward overall hydration. One practical tip: if you notice your legs feel particularly heavy or achy by evening, I'd take a moment to think about how much you've actually had to drink that day. It's a simple thing to check, and sometimes the answer is not much, which is an easy fix. Next is the timing and composition of your evening meal. This connects back to sleep, which is when a lot of tissue repair happens throughout your body, including in muscles and nerves. A very large meal, or one that's heavy in refined carbohydrates and sugar, close to bedtime can affect both how well you sleep and how your body spends its overnight hours. More of that time and energy goes toward digestion, potentially at the expense of other repair processes. This doesn't mean you need to skip dinner or eat at unusual hours. It's more about the general pattern. A dinner that includes some protein, vegetables, and isn't enormous in portion size tends to be associated with better sleep quality than a very heavy carbohydrate-dominant meal eaten late. And better sleep quality is relevant to essentially everything we've discussed today, since muscle and nerve repair processes are more active during deep sleep. The third habit is gentle movement, particularly in the evening. We want to be clear that this isn't about exercise in the sense of working out. It's about keeping blood flowing to your leg muscles through low-effort, low-impact movement. Something as simple as a short walk after dinner, a few minutes of seated leg extensions while watching television, ankle circles, or holding onto the back of a chair or counter and doing a few slow calf raises can all help. And the reasoning here is straightforward. Muscles that aren't moving for long periods tend to have less blood flow through them. And blood flow is how oxygen and nutrients get delivered and how waste products get cleared away. You don't need to do this for a long time or with any intensity. Even 5 or 10 minutes of gentle movement in the evening can make a noticeable difference for some people, particularly if they've been sitting for most of the day. One more thing worth mentioning because it ties several of these threads together. If you do start making changes, whether that's getting a blood test, adjusting your diet, adding a supplement your doctor has approved, or building in some evening movement, give it some time before judging whether it's working. Nerve tissue, muscle tissue, and the body's nutrient stores don't typically change overnight. Some people notice differences within a couple of weeks. For others, especially if a deficiency had been present for a long time, it can take longer, and the improvement might be gradual rather than a single dramatic before and after moment. Patience combined with actually tracking how you feel, maybe jotting down a quick note every few days about your energy, balance, or any numbness or cramping, can help you and your doctor figure out what's actually helping versus what might just be normal day-to-day variation. None of these habits are revolutionary on their own, but combined with addressing any actual nutrient gaps, ideally ones you've confirmed with a simple blood test, they create a more complete picture than any single vitamin or habit in isolation. Think of it less as find the one magic fix and more as remove a few small obstacles your body might be dealing with so that whatever capacity it has to repair and maintain itself can work as well as possible. Aging does come with real changes to how your body absorbs nutrients, repairs tissue, and maintains muscle and nerve function. But just aging doesn't mean nothing can be done. It often means there's a specific, checkable, and often very manageable reason behind what you're feeling. A conversation with your doctor, a couple of simple blood tests, and some informed choices about nutrition and daily habits can go a long way. It's also worth saying you don't need to walk into your next appointment and rattle off everything from this video like a checklist. Even just mentioning one thing, I've noticed my legs feel different lately, is that something we should look into? Is often enough to open the door. Doctors deal with this kind of thing all the time and most welcome the chance to investigate something specific rather than guess at a vague sense that something's off. You know your own body better than anyone, and noticing a change is often the first and most important step, well before any vitamin or supplement enters the picture. If this was helpful, you might also find value in some of our other videos on healthy aging and nutrition for seniors. And as always, take care of yourselves, and don't hesitate to loop your doctor into any changes you're considering.